Okay, so the next half of my discussion of my favorite horror movies of the 1930s. And we're kicking things off with number 8, and that would be the very underrated, at least to me, The Werewolf of London. This movie is not very well known because the 1941 film The Wolfman, to a large extent, eclipsed it. That became the definitive werewolf slash wolfman film. But Werewolf of London does feature a rather interesting and complicated performance by Henry Hull as a rather antisocial scientist who becomes infected in Tibet. He encounters a werewolf, and now he is trying to find the antidote to his curse in the form of a flower that only blooms under the full moon. And this one, what I like about it and what gives it the top 10 position here is that it's very, very much 1930s in terms of you get loads of character actors, a lot of interesting supporting performances by the roster, there was the word I was searching for, the roster of British character actors that Universal could pull from. And it also has a more interesting than usual female lead. Valerie Hobson was not that great in the same year's Bride of Frankenstein. We'll talk about that film later. But in this movie, she plays the scientist's restless wife, and you sympathize with her because he really is a pretty crappy husband, and she is a little bit more assertive and stands up for herself in ways that you don't see a lot of women do in these kinds of films back in the 1930s. So I got a soft spot for it. The next one, another one that a lot of people may not have heard of. It's not Universal, it's not one of the bigger names, but it does have an amazing performance by my man Boris Karloff as two twin brothers. It's called The Black Room. And in this film, they are dealing with a prophecy that predicts that one twin will kill the other and bring their family's line to an end. And one of the twins is very hedonistic, violent, murderous, while the other is a perfect gentleman. And in the story, you have Karloff playing the evil twin and the good twin, and also the evil twin masquerading as the good twin. So he just gets to pull out all the stops as an actor. One of his best performances, just because this movie gave him an opportunity to show what he could do. Really, he is the reason to see this movie. It doesn't have a lot of strong supporting performances. You don't really get wonderful turns from a lot of notable character actors in this one. He is pretty much the whole show, but it's a heck of a good show if you are a huge Boris Karloff fan like I am. Now we get to number 6, which is Dracula. Some of you may not agree with it being all the way down at number 6, but this was the first of the Universal horror cycle. And if you look at this movie and then you look at Frankenstein that came out several months later, you will see that there's a huge difference in terms of technique. And Dracula can get a little stagey. There are three performances that really make this movie worth watching. There is, of course, Bela Lugosi as the man himself, Dracula, and yes, he does get to say, "I never drink wine, and also listen to them, children of the night, what music they make. And he does have a gorgeous voice. The second performance worth keeping an eye on is Edward Van Sloan's Van Helsing. But I actually have a soft spot for Dwight Fry, who plays Renfield. In this movie, it's actually Renfield and not Jonathan Harker that goes to Transylvania to sell the property in England to Dracula. And it is there that he becomes infected, and so he comes back to England with Dracula, by that point an insane slave. And it's hard for your heart not to break for him. And he is so deliciously creepy and unhinged. So the other supporting performances aren't that great. The movie is a little stagey. Again, it shows that it is an early talkie. By the end of By the end of 1931, a lot of the, quote, early talkie bugs had been worked out. But at this point, they were still struggling with them a little bit. So that's why it's as far down on the list. Then, number 5, The Mummy. And I will know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this and say that certainly Dracula and the Mummy should be flipped. They should be reversed, because a lot of people have pointed out, and they're not entirely wrong, that the Mummy is pretty much a remake of Dracula, that it follows the same story beats. And a lot of the same actors are in it. You have Edward Van Sloan again playing the wise elder, and you have David Manners, who played Jonathan Harker in Dracula, coming into this film to again play the juvenile lead, and again be a little bit feckless and rather boring. But what puts the Mummy ahead of Dracula for me are a couple of things. First of all, it's my man Boris Karloff. And this was really the first horror film where he gets to use his voice. Unlike the shambling mummy of the 1940s, this mummy thinks for himself. He's an independent agent rather than at the control of someone else. And that makes him, for me, all the scarier. And he really gives a strong performance that uses that beautiful voice of his to its best potential. And also, this movie features perhaps the best of all the female characters, or at least the heroines of the movies of this genre from this decade. And I'm not going to spoil the movie for those of you who haven't seen it by explaining why I really like this character. But those of you who've seen it, and those of you who know my own feminist proclivities, will probably understand why I have a soft spot for her. She's played by Zita Johann, who didn't have much of a career in the movies, but she is much more interesting, so much more interesting than the character of Mina in Dracula, at least in the film Dracula. Here I'm going to go off topic for a minute and say, why can't the movies get Mina Seward right? Why have they always gotten her wrong? I should say Mina Murray. That's the character's name in the book. But she is just a much more active agent and a much more intelligent character in Stoker's novel, and the movies have never gotten her right. Okay, end of rant. But Helen, as she's named in The Mummy, is even before the end, even before the climax, just a much more intriguing figure, and played by a much more intriguing actress as well. So that's why I give the preference to The Mummy, because it pushes more of my buttons than Dracula does. Number 4, Frankenstein. James Whale's 1931 masterpiece. This is the movie that made a star out of Boris Karloff. He'd been working in films for quite some while, and Hollywood, the studios could never quite figure out what to do with him. They didn't know how to deploy him. But James Whale, the great director, saw him, pinpointed him as the Frankenstein's monster he was looking for, and the rest is cinema history. This movie also has a wonderful performance by Frederick Kerr as Henry Frankenstein. I don't know why they changed his name for the movie, but they did. Henry Frankenstein's father. And you also have Colin Clive. Colin Clive, unfortunately, lost his way, succumbed to alcoholism in the late 30s, and his career was cut short. It's a darn shame because he was a really fine actor, and he does give a really good performance as Henry Frankenstein. He's a little bit more sympathetic than a lot of people find the character, although really Fritz, his assistant, is the one who causes all the trouble. Everything that happens in the movie, in my opinion, is Fritz's fault. Number 3, King Kong. The first time I saw this, I was not 100% on board with it, but last year I got the chance to see this movie on the big screen. And since then, I've become a much bigger proponent of this movie, just because of the way that it's the sheer moviness of this movie. This is the kind of thing that you almost have to see on as big a screen as possible for it to have anywhere near the impact that it had on its original audience. And it also has that wonderful Max Steiner score. So it makes number 3 on this list. Number 2 and number 1 are so close together, there's barely a thread's difference. In fact, they may be interchangeable. Ask me on one day of the week, I may say one is number 2 and one is number 1, and then ask me on another day of the week, I may have it flipped. But today, I will say that at number 2, we have The Invisible Man. And this will always have a special place in my heart because it's the movie that gave us Claude Rains. And you remember me talking about how much I love Boris Karloff. I love Claude Rains even more. And he is the most diabolical, the most fascinating, the funniest, the most charismatic anti-hero in the horror genre. He's amazing. And then number 1 is The Bride of Frankenstein, starring Boris Karloff again. Colin Clive reprises his role. You have Dwight Fry showing up in a different role, and he's always wonderfully creepy. A lot of wonderful character actors in this film, and a wonderful sentimental sequence starring Karloff and a character actor hardly anybody has heard of, O.P. Hedgie, who plays the blind hermit who looks after Karloff's monster for a while. Of course, Mel Brooks parodied it brilliantly in Young Frankenstein, but we shouldn't forget that in the original film, it's one of the most affecting, sentimental scenes in this particular genre. So those are my top 10 favorites, and that's all the time I have. Please give me a like and subscribe if you agree with any one of these, or if you want to dispute me. Just click like, let me know what you think, and I'll be back with more on the 1930s next time.